Good morning and welcome to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Today we're working on sunshine and we are pretty far along in this process and we're going to be finishing it up pretty quickly, but we've got a little step back to make and catch you up from the last time we saw each other. So I'll be right back and do that. Well, thanks. I hope you're having a great day today. It's very cloudy here, so if our colors aren't quite right, that's probably why. We've had this spell of really cloudy and dreary weather for some reason, and we're just trying to make the best of it today. So we're going to take the sunshine inside. Now, last time we talked about this, I had the top just about done. I had the 4 blocks together. And I think I had the sashing on the inside with the little cornerstone in the middle. And I think I had even the sashing on the outside, the inner border here. I'm not sure about that, but I have added that same width border on the outside just to give it a little breathing room before we bring in the outside border. And then I'll move that over just so you can see. And then we added a 2.5 inch strip here on the outside, which is going to finish to 2 inches when we're all done. And our plan is to bind this in the dark gray solid, which I've already got made. It's ready to go. So let's look now at the back, because I think the last video we had, I was working on piecing together the back, and I think where we left it was that I wasn't quite sure how big it needed to be because the top wasn't finished. Well, both are finished now. So let's flip it over, and here's the back. And I think I was talking about this before, and I was considering cutting it here and putting a seam in and mixing up the patterns a bit. I decided not to do that and just leave it the way it was with the 5 fabrics coming this way and the little sashing strips between, and I added a wide sashing on the outside. I don't remember what size that was. That would have been a 4-inch piece of fabric, so it's going to finish at about 3.5 inches roughly when we're done. And that got me to a square shape. It's a little hard to tell the shape of the square here on this because of those long strips. Almost make it look like it's a rectangle, but it's not. Now, let's talk about the insides, because one of the goals with this project was to make it as inexpensively as possible. And to be able to do that, I needed to take advantage of what was in my stash. And when it came to batting, I really struggled with this. I ended up putting 5 strips of batting together to make a piece big enough for this. And it was quite a challenge because I thought I had more batting and I thought I had bigger pieces. But really what I ended up with were those little cutoffs when you make, let's say, a queen size or something close to a queen size out of the 90-inch roll batting. You get these little strips that are probably about that big, and I had a bunch of those. Usually I use all warm and white batting. It makes it simple for me because it's always the same batting. And I try to use a natural if I don't use warm and white, so it's really easy to tell what's what. Now, I did notice that this last strip of batting that I added together was a little bit different. It was actually, to me, it feels almost like it's got a little bit more polyester in it, but it doesn't seem to have that, what do they call it, scrim on it. But it's just a small little piece, a couple of inches here. So I didn't really worry with it too much. Now, on some of the other channels, we've talked about how to connect that batting, how to piece your batting. And I have talked before about either sewing it together or using a batting tape. And I've used the batting tape before and I've been fine with it. But I want to share with you something that happened on another project. And it influenced how I put this one together. I'm working on a Barnstar quilt that I am in the process of hand quilting. And on that particular quilt, I had to piece one edge and one corner of the batting to get it big enough. It's really big. It's 100 by 100, I think. So I needed about 10-12 inches on one end of the quilt to make the batting big enough. And I used the batting tape. And I was very pleased with it until I had to start hand quilting the project. And it's not that the batting tape is too thick or too gooey or whatever. It didn't hold all that moving of that quilt around in a non-quilted state, meaning that they were just kind of hanging in there loose with some pins holding it in place. The batting tape didn't hold, so I ended up having to go back in. Half the quilt is quilted, the other half is not quilted, and I'm trying to stitch those two pieces of batting together by hand. And it's doable, it'll work, but it was a pain, and it was very disruptive to have to do that in the middle of another process. So I will tell you, if you're going to make a large project, stick with the sewing. If you're going to do something small and it's going to be easy to quilt and it's going to be pretty quick, you're probably fine with the batting tape. But take that kind of as a cautionary message about when it's appropriate to use the tape and when it may not be. Now, like I said, this one I sewed together and I just used kind of not a zigzag, but a scalloped kind of stitch all the way through. And that seems to be holding it pretty well. And so we've got, like I said, 5 strips. And then what I did to make this come together, because my backing and my top are essentially the same size, so you need to make sure they get lined up properly, or you could find yourself quilting the very end and realizing they're not matched up. So I cut one edge. Once I had put the batting and the backing together, I trimmed that edge, one edge of the backing and the batting even on one edge right here. And then I measured the center of the backing and I measured the center of the top, marked them together so that they are together. And I'm going to go ahead and grab a little pin. So that ended up being right here. I can still see the fold mark. Now those are matched up and they're ready to go. So when I start quilting on this one, I'm going to start from this end because that's what's clipped. And the rest of them, you can see that they are not even. The top is just a little bit smaller than the backing all the way around. Now, it could be that once we start quilting this, we're going to find that that top stretches out a little bit and it overruns the backing. But if that happens, we'll just trim it a little bit. We've got nice wide borders. We could trim it 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch even and be fine. And then we'll put our binding on and everything's going to be great. Now, one of the things that I talked about doing with this project is quilting it in multiple colors. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to machine quilt this project because it's small and it will be easy to get in through our machine and not have a problem with it. But I think what I'm also going to do is I'm going to quilt in the background areas, the white here, with white thread. And then when I move to quilting inside the shapes on the blocks, then I'm going to use a yellow thread. I was checking the other day on my wall, and I have a couple of spools of old thread that is yellow that I think will work fine. This is not going to be a quilt that I anticipate being an heirloom, or that it's going to be some fabulous bed covering that we use for decades or anything like this. This is a simple wall hanging that's going to be used for decoration, just like modern Dresden is, so we can enjoy it here through the videos, or I may decide to hang it somewhere in my home and enjoy it there as well. Okay, so we are going to start machine quilting this now, and right now I've got my machine set up with the white thread. I added my walking foot to my machine, and if you're not familiar with that, a walking foot allows your machine to, what would I call it, more effectively grab a hold of the fabric and pull it through very evenly. Some of the new machines call it an even feed foot. And actually what it does is it's grabbing the top side of the fabric while the machine is grabbing the bottom side of the fabric. And I always find that once I've got batting in here, it really does work much better with that foot. So I've got a really long stitch. I've got a 4.0 for my length, and it's creating a nice long stitch like this. So that I'm happy with. Now what we're going to do first is we're going to stitch the white areas, and I stitched the top where I said I was starting, and I'm going to work my way down in the middle, in that sashing in the middle. And I'm really just picking an area that I want to sew and using some landmarks in my foot there to keep us all even. And as I sew, I'm just going to kind of try to keep the fabric as smooth as I can, and we'll just see how it works out. The great thing about using that longer stitch is it's super easy to take out if we don't like the way it looks. Now, I will say a couple of things. First of all, I've got a lot of noise outside today. For some reason, things are not on schedule, so where I expect to have a nice quiet environment, I don't particularly. We're just going to try to work through that. And then as far as the sewing goes, I've sewn down the middle in that little sashing on the right side, and I've probably given it about 1/4 of an inch distance from the seam that I'm sewing to the edge of the fabric where the two pieces are joined. And I'm in the cornerstone now, and I'm going to take a right angle turn, 90-degree turn, and I'm going to come down the middle of the quilt now to kind of sew in that first block. And I just backspaced 1 stitch. And that's because I'm not entirely sure where that seam is going to go on the outside, but I wanted to get it close enough. So right now, let's see if you can see that. here's what I have. I have this seam up here sewn all the way across, and then I have a seam here to here sewn. And you can kind of see that. We've got a little bit of puff in the top, which is going to be fine because we're going to keep sewing on that. And I think what I'm going to do now is come and take this seam line all the way down on this side, just like we did at the top. When you're sewing like this and you're coming from one side and going to the other side, it's a little bit different from sewing maybe where you're hand quilting, where you're starting in the middle and working out. But we want to try to use the same philosophy. We want to take an area where we've got it really smooth and work our way out. And that's what we're doing with this one. We're trying to keep all of that fabric as neat and smooth as we can. Keeping this smooth. And I talked about using the shape of the foot to try to determine where you're placing your seam. And I wanted to explain that a little bit. In this case, I've got a little runner on each side of the foot, and there's a gap in the way that's made that allows me to see through to the fabric. And I am putting the seam between the yellow fabric and the white fabric right in the middle of that gap, and that way I can ensure that I get a straight line. Okay, now we just met up with the seam we just put in there. And we're just going to straighten it. We're going to keep coming down. And I'm using these two hands not to push it through, but just to kind of guide it and keep it straight. And I'm get to the corner and I'm going to turn, and I'm going to come down this side now. And I'm going to keep doing that until I've got all 4 of these blocks sewn around the outside. And then at that point, what I will do is I will decide how I'm going to sew the yellow, and I'll proceed with that. Now, there's a lot to machine quilting, and I would love to sit here and show you everything I'm doing, but I'm not sure if that's going to hold your interest so much. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to allow my camera to run and maybe put some music here and speed this footage up so it's not quite as long, and you will be able to see some of the things I'm talking about. And if there's something in particular, I may break and come back and talk to you about it a little bit. But I kind of want to go through this just a little faster than we can do recording the whole thing. So we'll see you in just a minute. what happened here? I was working on the white stitching around the quilt and ran into a bit of a problem. Very easy to fix. I ran out of thread in my bobbin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to the yellow because I need to fill up a bobbin. And we're just going to look at the quilting for the blocks now. And I'm going to start with, let's start with this one. It is partially stitched around. I think what I'm going to do is first of all come in here and stitch along this plus sign here, just probably to the inside of the yellow fabric. And then what I'm going to do is just stitch around the outside of the star shape on the inside of the gray material. And what we'll probably do is we'll do that and then take a break and I'll finish it up and then come back where we are almost finished with our binding, and I'll show you how I machine quilted this. It's going to be, for this thing, a fairly dense quilting. It's not going to be excessively, but it's going to have a pretty good bit of quilting in it by the time we're done, and that would be a good time to kind of look at what we have. So I'm going to show you a little bit of this quilting here. We're going to do this section. I'll show you that, and then we'll take a break and come back with more later. Okay, we're going to start just anywhere here. And because this is a smaller area, we're going to need to pick a different place that we're going to sew. You remember I was talking about how the segments of the foot allow me to keep things even. And we're just going to pick a different one and we're just going to start going. Now for these, most of them are, I'm just looking at a distance versus an actual spot on the foot. And really it only has to be as precise as you want it to be. Now I oops, I had to unplug my machine and it's caused the stitches to revert to a 2.4. So give me a minute to fix that. I think while I'm taking this little line of stitches out, I'll talk to you about a couple of things that I have really come to see in the last few videos that I did want to talk to you a little bit about, because it may change how I videotape some of these. And that is that trying to sew on camera and create something that makes sense and that you're willing to watch and stay with me while I do it is very difficult, because we all make mistakes. We all have things that happen when we're sewing, just like this little issue that I'm correcting right now. The cord for my machine came out, and when it did, the power stopped flowing to the machine, and when I plugged it back in, it went back to its default settings. So those are things that happen that we don't really control. Today I had my lawn man come about 3 hours early, and I'm sure that is because of this crazy weather that we were talking about earlier. But it makes it very difficult to try to film around those things. And For me in particular this week, between other things going on and the weather, it's just been really difficult to find a day. Now it does look like we're clearing up a little bit outside and we're going to have some sunshine. So maybe instead of just working with this morning, I can just make it kind of a move into afternoon and continue to sew. But I'm beginning to think that the quilters out there that have channels and they're not sewing a lot on screen, that this may be why, because it's challenging at best to be able to get everything to work together and make it make sense. But if you've sewn any amount of time, you know that things do happen. Sometimes they're mistakes that you make, errors that you make, and sometimes they have nothing to do with you. They just happen. Okay, so we've got that out. And if you've ever wondered what happens to all those threads that I throw out like that, I have to pick them up. That's kind of symbolic of what I'm talking about, because we're pressed for time. We want to get something done to show you, to keep your interest. But the reality is I probably wouldn't do that if you weren't waiting on me. Okay, so we're going to go back and do this section again. I guess my point is, if you don't mind those things and you prefer to see the sewing and the actual progress, let me know. If you would prefer just to see the magic has happened and you want to see the end product, let me know. I suspect there's a little bit of both. So we've readjusted that back to the 4. I do like the way that looks better. It reminds me a little bit of how it would look if it were hand stitch. I'm just going around this plus shape, and I'm probably putting in about a seam about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. We are just about there. Well, let's say we're halfway. Now we're getting to the place where we're going to join those up, and you're just going to overstitch that first line of stitches a little bit, and then we'll back it up a stitch or two to lock it in, and that's it. I will show you that. Here it is right here. We've sewn all the way around there. We're going to do the same thing to the gray. We're going to be using the yellow thread and we're going to stitch that right here. Now in these areas where it's going to join up, we're just going to do what we can to join those lines so they make sense. Sometimes that line will come into the yellow and join back up with the gray, and sometimes we'll just avoid the yellow entirely if we can. It doesn't really matter that much. We're just trying to stitch this down so that it looks attractive and it hangs out nicely on the wall. Now, one thing you do need to watch for is, I don't know if you can tell this, but we've got this sewn, this, and this. So 3 sides of this are done. And I think even before I do the outside of this, I'm probably going to change back to the white thread and put these boxes in to finish this up. Because what will happen, and we can see it a little bit here, is we've sewn this, but it's shifted just a little bit. So we've got a little bit of extra fabric right here, a little bit of puffiness. So we just want to make sure that when we sew that gray, we are pulling this snugly and making sure it's really good and flat when we sew, so we don't make that even worse and have a buckle of fabric there. We want to keep that as straight as possible. So that's my plan for quilting this. I'm not going to cover all this today, showing you me running the machine. I don't think you need to see that. And I think I've explained exactly what I'm going to do sufficiently enough that you know what's going to happen. Now, when we come back next time, the top will all be quilted. I'll explain to you exactly what I did, give you a little look at all of that. I may even put some stitches here in the border of this as well. We'll just see how that kind of works out. But I think it'll be really interesting, and we've gone through this really quickly. I think we've got 2 videos complete. This is the 3rd one, and we'll have 1 more, so there'll be 4 videos for this. And we should be able, at the end of the next video, to hang it on the wall complete. I think for a project that is using all materials we had on hand, with the exception of this yellow fabric and then the gray we're going to use for the binding, it's been a very inexpensive project as well. So I thank you so much for being with me today. If you saw something you liked, be sure to give me a thumbs up. If you have a preference on what you'd like to see in your videos, leave a comment. I'm always interested to hear what people are looking for in videos, because we have such a broad range of viewers. We have people who are new to some of these techniques, and we have experienced sewers. So trying to find that balance in what we need to cover and what we don't, it's very good for me to get feedback from you. Now, we'll see you next week. We're going to finish this up, you know where, right here at the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Bye.